ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Matt Dunn has had his heart set on different goals over the course of his life so far. First there was competitive swimming, then a career in the Navy, and then going back to finish his high school certificate at TAFE. Matt went on to study biotechnology and turned his focus to finding cures for paediatric leukaemia. But then in 2018, Matt and his wife Phoebe got the devastating news that their little daughter Josephine had incurable brain cancer, known as DIPG. Matt now had a new purpose and it was all-consuming, using his expertise as a medical researcher to try and help Josie. He began researching this deadly childhood cancer, and Josie became the first child in the world to be given new therapies that slowed the tumour's growth. Matt continues to investigate more effective treatments for this childhood cancer, and he's also started the charity Run DIPG to help fund research and to support families like his. Hi, Matt.
Hello, Sarah.
Your first big goal, Matt, was to be a success in the swimming pool. What made you so passionate about swimming?
I suppose it's the non-political nature of swimming. You know, if you are fast or if you improve your times, there's no way you can refute it. It becomes almost scientific. You get better, you get faster, you qualify for country, you qualify for state, and then eventually your ultimate goal is to qualify for nationals, and you end up training twice a day and becoming best friends with the people that you swim with.
And was that your dream, to qualify for nationals and I guess go on?
Yeah, throughout high school I dedicated most of my time to swimming, to doing, weight training and to getting the cardiovascular fitness up and doing training camps and, swimming 10, 14 times a week.
So how did that come to an end, Matt?
Well, it was 1995 and it was a few months before qualifying for the last age nationals, which were to be held in Adelaide, and we were doing pre-training, and a fantastic young butterflyer hip and shouldered me on a netball court, and I fell over and I broke my scaphoid of my wrist, and it ended my nationals dream there and then. And so I got very frustrated and disenchanted and disheartened, and I ended up doing something completely different. I kept swimming once it got better, but the dream of going to those nationals had passed, and then I suddenly found myself in the Navy.
In a different kind of water. Well, how did that become a dream? Why was that where you switched focus to?
I suppose I had put all of my effort into swimming, and I suppose my grades reflected the imbalance, the priority I had put on swimming. And I remember sitting in the car, and my stepfather, Bob Dunn, who used to take me to training early in the morning, had just received my Term 1 school report card, and it didn't reflect the kind of grades that I probably needed to be a successful human, and encouraged me to become more independent. And so I took that literally and then found myself in naval recruitment. And within a month or so, I was in the Navy.
So did you join the Navy even before you finished high school? How old were you?
Yeah, I was 17. I was 17 and a few months old when I officially started recruit school training in Victoria.
A lot of teenagers would struggle with the discipline of that life, but how did the Navy suit you?
I really enjoyed it. It became almost this team atmosphere. You worked together, you did what you were told. Once I got to recruit school, I was swimming and running and getting fit and learning all the, the nuances of military life. And it really became almost like living as part of a team again.
You ended up serving on submarines for much of your Navy career. How much space do you get to yourself on a submarine, Matt?
Well, if you think of a coffin, that's about it. So in each bunk area, there's the space for 6 coffins, I suppose. And the roof of the accommodation area is about 6 foot. So I'm 6'3". So there's a lot of hunchback going on. So there's not a lot of room for your own self. You really need to share this. And it teaches you great life lessons about thinking about others before you think about yourself.
Do you ever get used to the claustrophobia, to the small space that you're in?
I never really found that an issue. I suppose if you do, submarines is not the place for you. I suppose I also joined at a very young age, and it just became this great adventure. We were commissioning the second of the Collins-class submarines, HMAS Farncombe. I was part of this great crew who had, brought this submarine from the ship dock through all of the sea trials, and now we were becoming a real submarine. And I was fortunate to be a part of it, and I was the youngest sailor on board at the time. So when we commissioned the submarine in January 1998, I cut the cake. The commissioning cake, and typically that's done with the captain's wife, but the captain wasn't married, so I got to do it with his mum.
And what was your role day to day on submarines?
I enlisted as an electronic warfare analyst, so our job is to use the receivers that are atop of the periscope to intercept electromagnetic energy, so things that are transmitted, and to inform the command team about what's in our area and whatever our job was at that time in that place.
Is it noisy inside a submarine?
It's not typically. Of course, when you are charging your electric batteries with a diesel engine, then it's very loud at the back of the submarine, and that only happens when you need to charge the batteries, but typically it's silent.
And do people talk? I've heard that people whisper on submarines, or is that just old movie myth?
You certainly don't talk loudly. You are very conscious of the environment that you're in and the job that you're doing. And everybody on the submarine has been through extensive training to understand why they're there. They're not there by chance. They've been through 2 years of training to become a submariner on top of their specialty training, and mine was electronic warfare. And so, you know why you're there, so you don't make much noise.
It sounds like this was an environment that suited you and you excelled at. Why did you decide you should go back and finish your high school education?
Well, when I enlisted after my failed swimming career and my failed year 11, I needed my mum to sign the permission for me to join because I was under 18, and I made her a promise there and then that I would finish my high school certificate when I got the chance in the Navy. And so I spent 3 years on HMAS Farncombe, and then the Navy said it was time to go ashore. And so that was my opportunity to do my high school certificate.
And what sort of change was that for you to suddenly be heading back to classes? How did you like study?
Well, I worked during the day at Maritime Headquarters doing submarine stuff on ashore, and then I went to night school 3 nights a week. And I really enjoyed it. It was for adults. So, there was like-minded people all trying to do their best to further themselves in new ways and, become friendly with many of the students in different courses, and would spend the weekends doing assignments together, and really, really loved learning at my own pace and doing things that I wanted to do. I mean, I'm very good at doing things that I like. I'm not so good at doing things I dislike. So
it was the right time.
It was just the time, yeah.
The September 11 attacks happened while you were in Sydney and doing your TAFE certificate. What did that mean for you?
Well, first of all, it kind of delayed my plans of going to uni. Suddenly, the last 6 years of war games become very real. And so there was an opportunity to join the Navy's best submarine at the time, HMAS Deschano, as the lead electronic warfare analyst, and go back to sea for a year and support all of the maritime activities that were happening around that time. And of course, we had not only September 11, but we had the Bali bombings. And so, it was an opportunity to put some of the training that I had done and some of the sea time that I'd previously finished into practice. So I delayed my university or my tertiary education by a year and went back to sea for that year on HMAS Deschano, which was an amazing experience with so many amazing men and women and so many amazing experiences.
What was the scariest moment in all of your years on submarines?
There were a few, but I suppose in that period where I had gone back to sea for the last year, we were preparing to go away for quite an extended period of time, and we were testing all of the systems, as you always do, prior to setting sail. And we were off Rottnest Island, and we were at our maximum diving depth, and one of our pipes in the motor room burst from the external pressure, and it led to us taking on 8 tonnes of water in 8 seconds through a hole that was 8 centimetres wide, and the submarine suddenly tilted backwards and started to go backwards.
Was there panic on board? Did you feel panic?
Absolutely none. Being at our maximum diving depth, everyone was at emergency stations and was positioned for an event like this. And the team worked with mechanical precision. The operator of the engineering panel was the first to respond to a valve, which meant that he could shut all of the external holes instantaneously, which saved the submarine. And then the team went into action. It was incredible to watch. And of course, being an electronic warfare analyst, my job was only really important when we were at periscope depth, and we were way below that at that time. And to watch the team execute all the years of training with precision was, in some ways it was scary, but it was also very humbling to be part of that crew.
After all that time, the years really you spent on submarines, is there anything you miss about them?
When I started to go to university, I kind of found the kind of clinical or boring nature of study a little bit arbitrary. I kind of missed the opportunity to chuck on a set of cylinders and go diving off the submarine. And, I was in charge of all of the small arms on the submarine, including rifles and pistols, and to doing that kind of stuff and coming into different ports and to doing my job and providing the command team with the information they needed to make decisions. So it was a little bit difficult to swallow initially, but I really, really fell in love with the course and had such fantastic lecturers at the University of Newcastle, some that inspired me to take up a career in research, which I never envisaged would be my path.
Yeah, the library, though, must have felt slightly ho-hum after that life you were leading. So, but how was it that you got interested in researching cancer?
Well, initially I was doing a science-based course as a pre-med. So my goal was to go back and do postgraduate medicine, either at Sydney or somewhere else. And for the last 6 months of the course, you do a placement in a research laboratory. And my favourite lecturer, Professor Brett Nixon, took me on as a placement student for those 6 months. And it was an amazing experience. He gave me kind of the anonymity and trust to really execute a great idea that he had. And it really became me problem solving and trying to get this novel technique to work and to discover something. And within that 6 month placement, we had discovered something new. And that was really the catalyst to continue my PhD training under his supervision and under the supervision of Professor John Aiken. And throughout that period, we made tons of new discoveries, and it really set me on a course of discovery.
You also met your wife, Phoebe, at university. What drew you to her?
She was very attractive and remains to be very attractive.
Good answer. Good answer, Matt.
I had seen her around the library, the medical library. She was doing medicine, and we had a chance meeting when I was working at a local pub on Anzac Day, 2007. I was managing that hotel when I wasn't at uni, and she was there enjoying the festivities of Anzac Day. And of course, Anzac Day means a bit to me. I had been to the dawn service earlier in the morning with some good friends, and she was there enjoying the afternoon with her friends.
And once the two of you got together, did you always plan on having kids?
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, everything's always been a little bit delayed. Having spent almost 9 years in the Navy and now coming to the end of my university studies and being with the girl that I wanted to marry, absolutely wanted to have children as soon as we could after we got married.
And what were things like when Josephine came along?
Life was perfect. I had my great job as a cancer proteomicist, which is a person that sequences proteins for cancer, and a really emerging technology in cancer. And I'd spent some time in Denmark after I finished my PhD, really honing those skills and being supported tremendously by the Cancer Institute of New South Wales, who helped me purchase the machines that I was using in Denmark and bringing them to Australia. And then, having a newborn child in our own apartment that we were paying off in town, in the city of Newcastle near the beach, life couldn't get better. We would take Josie out to a coffee shop before we'd go to work and have coffee together, and, she'd go off to Mama's house for sitting, and Phoebe would go to work, and we just had life sorted.
She started going to a daycare centre at the university where you were working too. What were those drives in together like?
They were great. She was so articulate. We were really best friends. We would, I like to play matchy and wear the same or similar clothes to her when we go out.
What, I'm imagining, like a little polka dot dress or something.
Well, she didn't really like that. She was more trendy than I was. She certainly had an opinion about what she would wear. She hated the colour mustard. When her grandmother would put her in mustard, she'd refuse to wear that. She was just ahead of her time. It was almost an old soul in a new body. We would listen to things like Cat Stevens, and she would love it, and all that old Beatles music. And so it was a joy. She would talk to me about her friends and what she would do each day at daycare, and sometimes at lunchtime I'd sneak across campus and look over the playground just to see she was okay.
On one of those mornings, what happened when you realised you'd left your lab keys at home?
Well, at the time, we had moved from town because Phoebe was pregnant with George and decided that we had to have more space than our apartment in the city, much to my disapproval.
But you used to a submarine.
Well, that's right. I didn't need a lot of space. And we had bought a little miner's cottage in this beautiful suburb called Dudley, and we had saved up and we'd just started to do some renovations because it really was not fit for purpose for the four of us for when George would turn up. And so my beautiful parents-in-law suggested that we could live with them while we were renovating, which was a huge help. It meant we could really get stuck into the house. And so it's a little bit further away from where the university campus is, adds another 20 minutes. And so that Josie and I would have to travel there together. And then I was about halfway to work and I'd realised that I'd forgotten my lab and office keys. I must have left them on the bench. And I let out a sigh, I suppose, and I said, Jesus. And then on cue, a beautiful little voice piped up from behind my seat that articulated my frustrations perfectly. And all I could hear was, "Fucking hell, Daddy. Silly Daddy."
She's 2 or something? How old
she was two and a half. And so, during breeding, I suppose she's inherited some of my sailor's mouth, unfortunately. But it was on cue and perfectly delivered.
On another one of those drives, Matt, though, you noticed something was odd or unusual with Josie's behaviour. What was it?
It wasn't much after that incident that I was taking her into little school and she was not engaging with any of my banter. And I thought that she must be coming down with the virus because her little brother, who had now been born, had a virus, and so I thought she must be coming down with it anyway. She seemed okay, got her to daycare, went across campus, and then I received a call at about 11 a.m. from her educator, Sarah, who told me that Josie was uncharacteristically clumsy. And given that, I had noticed that she was a little bit off, I kind of cancelled my plans for the day and raced across campus and picked her up and took her home. And we got home just about lunchtime and, she didn't want to eat. And I thought, well, maybe the best thing to do is to have a rest. So I took her down to her bedroom. And as we were walking down the hallway, she was falling off balance as she was walking and she was hitting each of the walls. And I thought, wow, she's really tired. Anyway, I put her to sleep. And when she woke up, she was fine. Everybody else came home later that afternoon and everything seemed fine.
So why did your wife decide to take her into hospital the next morning?
Well, the next morning was Saturday, the 16th of February, and I went into work really early because I had grants that were not ready and I had to use that time to really get on top of them. And at about 9 a.m, Phoebe rang me and said that Josie was refusing to walk and she was very worried about her. So her and her father, of course, we were living with, was a GP and had just retired after caring for his community for more than 40 years. And I rendezvoused with them at the John Hunter Emergency Department and got through triage and there they were. And I could tell that both Chris and Phoebe were very worried about what was going on.
And so what happened once you met up with them at the hospital? What was the next step for Josie?
It was a Saturday and we were fortunate that a senior paediatric neurologist was on call and he came straight in and he did some tests with Josie and some quite simple tests like asked her to put her 2 pointer fingers together, and when she did that, she completely missed them, meaning that she had some vision issues. And so that rang even more alarm bells, and she was scheduled to have an MRI on that same day under a general anaesthetic, which was all a bit shocking. And I could tell, Phoebe was very distressed. And I was, positive, thinking, okay, well, she's got an infection. She's been unwell. Maybe there's some swelling. She'll be okay. She'll pull through.
Where were you and Phoebe taken after the results of that MRI came through?
Well, I suppose we were waiting for her to come out of her general anaesthetic and her scan, like all parents do, and parents that have been through this who wait for their kids who may get injured and have a general anaesthetic in the surgical recovery bay. And when we were waiting, we saw the senior neurologist come out of the surgical department with the senior paediatric oncologist of the John Hunter Children's Hospital, Dr. Frank Alvaro, who's a colleague of mine and had done my wife's oncology training when she was a registrar. And so we straight away knew it was cancer. And then we went down to his office and he showed us the scan and he told us that it was DIPG.
Had you heard of that before, Matt? Did you and Phoebe know immediately what that meant?
No, not really. Obviously knew about gliomas and high-grade gliomas, but not specifically DIPG. And DIPG gets its name because it grows within the brainstem or the pontine region of the brainstem. And you can see it quite clearly on an MRI, this mass pushing the brainstem and squashing the brainstem. And that leads to the neurological symptoms that she was showing.
So once they told you that's what they'd found, how much could they tell you about what that would mean, what prognosis was, what treatment was, all of that?
The prognosis for DIPG is unfortunately pretty concrete. There's no therapeutics yet developed. There's an opportunity to do a biopsy as part of Zero Childhood Cancer, which we quickly agreed to, and then they offer 30 rounds of radiation therapy within the brainstem, and it's considered completely palliative. And for 2/3 of kids, they'll get some symptom control for a few months, but then the tumour will come back and there's nothing further that the clinical team can offer.
Were you and Phoebe taking this in that day? I mean, you'd gone from just thinking Josie had a cold or a virus or something to this news. What do you remember about being in that office and hearing that?
Disbelief, really. It's hard to swallow that something that you love and care for so much could possibly have something of this magnitude. I suppose for me, and given that I worked in cancer and surrounded by and know so many incredible colleagues around the world, and thought there's someone that's going to be able to help us here. This is not a hopeless case. I appreciate what Frank has told us, but there's something we can do about this. So I was mission-driven. My wife and my father-in-law probably instantaneously appreciated the gravity of what was happening and knew that Josie would leave us within the 12 months from diagnosis, if not before. But for me, it was about researching, finding the people that knew what I didn't know, finding collaborations and figuring out what we do next. So it really became a mission.
What could you start doing in your own lab to further the research that was being done into DIPG?
It didn't take me long to realise that there were a couple of leading experts in the disease. One in Sydney, David Ziegler at Sydney Children's Hospital, who we elected to be treated by while we were having radiotherapy in Sydney. And then the other one was Professor Michelle Mongi from Stanford University. And she was the first clinician scientist to take a DIPG out of a child's brainstem and get it to grow in the lab. And she was very generous with her time with me, in the days after diagnosis, and we had a Zoom meeting for a few hours, and she was showing me all of the research that she was doing in real time and all of we call them models, but they're really basically kids' tumours that she can grow in the Petri dish in the lab, and she agreed to share them with me in real time. And she, at the same time, had showed me some confidential data where she'd been able to put some DIPGs into mice and then treat the mice with an emerging immune therapy, and she was able to cure all of the mice from DIPG. And so for me, that was great. That was the ticket I needed for hope. And she was working on developing a clinical trial. And so, it became instantaneous to me that I needed to study how we can use drugs that are already available to try and slow the growth of the tumour while I wait for this clinical trial to open, and, buy myself some time and buy Josie some time until, the smarter people around me could initiate the trial that's going to save her.
Josie began receiving the standard palliative treatments for DIPG, including high-dose steroids. What kind of impact did they have on her?
It's just so challenging for these beautiful little ones to start taking high-dose steroids. You go from, I want to say irrational, because some of my kids are not so rational, but, this beautiful, well-mannered, polite child into, somewhat of a little angry monster who can't sleep, who's starving, is rapidly retaining fluid from the steroids, but are absolutely necessary to stop the life-threatening inflammation that's now surrounding the brainstem from the growing tumour, and the pain that causes, squashing the different nerves of the brain. And so, it's really challenging to go from a perfect child one day to a child that's on high-dose steroids that is going to die within 12 months. It's a really confronting situation.
Josie also began radiation treatment in Sydney. What did that involve for her? She's just a toddler.
So she would have, being the youngest person receiving radiotherapy each day, she would be on the list to be first, but it meant that she would have to fast from the night before because she would need to have a general anaesthetic prior to her receiving radiation. So every day she would have a general anaesthetic. She would then undergo radiation therapy, and then she would come out of surgical recovery again, almost hungover from the GA, absolutely starving, and in a surgical recovery base surrounded by people she didn't know for 30 consecutive sessions whilst we were living out of home, out of a suitcase, and her symptoms becoming worse throughout that period of time. And in fact, during the last week of radiation, after 5 other weeks of therapy where she'd gotten sick, where her central line, which is used to deliver the general anaesthetic, had got colonised by bacteria. So we had 7 nights of inpatient stay on IV antibiotics. And then the last week to be waking up each morning before radiation and vomiting, meaning that the tumour was growing and she was needing even further steroids to try and stem some of those symptoms and to make her feel somewhat alive.
In the midst of this absolutely horrible time, Matt, you found yourself running, going for a run around Hyde Park. Tell me about that. When
Josie central line had gotten contaminated and she needed to stay as inpatients within the Sydney Children's Hospital, being a public hospital, only one parent could stay. And so Josie, of course, was allowed to make that decision each evening, and I was always hoping it was going to be me. But she chose Phoebe, and so would I, on the first evening, and then I stayed until the girls were settled and ready for sleep. Josie was asleep, and Phoebe was getting ready to go to sleep too in the pull-out bed next to her. And so I was driving back to our accommodation in Rozelle, and I drove past Hyde Park, and I thought, oh, there's the park, and I had runners on. And so I pulled over the car and thought, I've just got to do something to feel alive again. And so I did one lap in the dark, and it kind of hurt, but the physical pain kind of stemmed some of the emotional turmoil that I was suffering from. We were probably a month now since diagnosis, and as you can imagine, it had become all-consuming, and that run kind of recentered my ability to think and to get clarity and to, further drive what we were doing in the lab back in Newcastle at the same time. And so the second night came along, and I was hoping Josie was going to elect me to stay again, but she didn't. And so the next night I did 2 laps around it, and it really started to plant the seed of, how I was going to manage my emotional turmoil throughout this journey, and it really became about running, and it really enabled me to have that time to put all of the many boxes that I had surrounding me into their place and to try and figure out what we were going to do throughout this nightmare.
Mm. As the months went on, Josie's health continued to deteriorate, as you'd been told to expect, and you and your team at the lab are in this race against time, really, to try to find new treatments that might be effective. Were you having any luck by the end of 2018?
Yeah, so by the end of 2018, we were fortunate to have had some cells shared to us from Professor Mongi at Stanford that looked like Josie's tumour. So they had the same mutations that Josie's tumour had, and we got that information from the Zero Childhood Cancer Program, which we're very grateful for them sharing the information to us. So that kind of gave me the blueprint of where I needed to look in terms of what kind of therapies we could possibly reposition. And when I got her biopsy results, it told me the mutations that had caused her cancer. And serendipitously, I found a new therapy that was published in 2016, basically showing that this therapy had targeted one of the changes that was causing her tumour to grow so quickly, and that this therapy got into the brain really effectively, an oral therapy, and it had just commenced early phase clinical trials for adults with another form of high-grade glioma called glioblastoma, and they had just gotten to the maximum tolerated dose on that trial. And when I saw that drug, a colleague of mine had contacted me and I discussed it with her, and she said, look, I know the CEO of the company. This company, Casia Therapeutics, had just bought this drug from a huge American pharmaceutical company called Genentech, and they had bought the lease to the drug and were running the clinical trial, and they were in Barangaroo in Sydney. So I contacted the CEO of the company, James, and the CFO and the CEO came up the freeway, a 2-hour trip to have a meeting to see what we were doing, and agreed to give me the drug, which was then called GDC 0084, to test on the cells that we were growing from Professor Mongi, and it was effective. It wasn't just effective in Josie-like tumours that we were growing, but also across all of the different DIPGs that we were growing in the lab. And so we really set about studying how this drug worked, because we knew that one therapy wasn't going to be enough to stop the growth of this tumour. We really had to understand what other drugs we could combine with it.
So once you saw these positive results in the lab, did you want to immediately be able to try it on Josie? I mean, I imagine there are huge ethical restraints about applying this new medicine, particularly to, the child of the researcher.
Yeah, there was, absolutely. And we were fortunate that we had a great advocate in our court. We were back in Newcastle, of course, and Dr. Frank Alvaro navigated those complexities for us. We had shared all of our data that we had generated to hugely talented staff members and students in my lab, Ryan Duchatel and Evie Jackson. We're working on this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so we shared the data with the pharmaceutical company who gave us access for compassionate to give to Josie. Frank's team calculated a child equivalent dose, which ended up being right on the money. And then because I knew that one therapy wasn't going to work, and I think everybody shared that opinion, the best other therapy that we could get access to that combined with it was a drug that had already been used in DIPG. And so we had safety data, and thankfully that company gave us compassionate access to combine it with GDC 0084. And so she not only received GDC 0084 as the first child, but she also received it in combination with another therapy.
When you say compassionate access, what does that mean, Matt?
Well, because we don't have any therapeutics for the disease, to be able to treat a child with this drug, there's a number of hurdles you must jump, and probably the first one is to get the company to give the drug for treatment, and then the second is to apply for TGA approval for special access to make sure that it's all legal and it's appropriate to give in Australia. So both companies were very generous and provided us with compassionate access to both therapies.
What changes did you see in Josie once you started giving her these new therapies?
A number. Firstly, her reliance on steroids decreased quite rapidly. Her movement improved dramatically. She even learnt to swim in our pool, albeit in circles, because the right side of her body didn't really work. We've got an amazing video of her swimming in circles. She then started to go back to dancing lessons with her cousins, whom she loves so much. And my incredible team organised Josie her one and only dance concert called Dance DIPG, where they organised a whole different troupe of dancers from different themes, Indian dancers, jazz dancers, ballet dancers, and Josie got to do 2 dances with her cousins on the stage during this performance. And it was one of those moments, you recall and you remember, because you will never have them again.
Just before Christmas of that year, your family got a new addition when baby Harriet was born. What did Josie think about this new little sister?
Oh, it was incredible. She was doing well then. She'd been on the new therapies for about a month, and then Harriet turned up, and she had a little baby doll to play with. She loved her so much. She, you know what 3-year-olds are like, 3-year-old girls particularly. I've got this great photo of Harriet in one of those Barbie prams sitting there, and Josie pushing her along in the stroller. I know it doesn't sound overly safe. Now I verbalise that, but...
you had bigger things to contend with. I think the Barbie stroller's fine.
Yeah, but, that was a very special time for her, and they would spend a lot of time together, Harriet rolling around next to Josie, who was gradually losing the ability to move again.
So was this a hopeful time for you, Matt? I mean, was there a voice in you saying, hey, maybe we've cracked this and she's going to make it?
I suppose we had was 3.5 months of no growth again after we started the therapies, and, her symptoms improved. But I knew that it would come back. And so we were working around the clock on the next plan, of course, and the next plan beyond that plan. And I'm so thankful for the team, even to this day, for their work. But I don't know. No, I don't think I was hopeful. I was thankful. Thankful for the time, and really just racing, running, literally running in the middle of the night to train for marathons, but also running to the next treatment, because I knew that these drugs were going to fail. And I didn't know when that was going to be, but I knew it was going to happen.
You were on a family holiday at Byron Bay when you realised that Josie was sick again, that the tumour must be growing again. So what was your next step?
Throughout that time, given that I knew that the tumour would evolve and become resistant, we had done experiments in the lab to study how that would happen. And again, serendipitously, we were working on another therapy that had shown some anecdotal evidence, a poster presented at the American Society of Clinical Oncology meeting in 2017 that had shown a DMG patient, so a young adult patient with a diffuse midline glioma that was growing just above where the brainstem is, where a DIPG grows, but it has the similar mutations as DIPG. This patient was on a clinical trial testing this drug called ONC201, and she had a near clear objective response that extended for 3 years, receiving this therapy once a week. And so I contacted the company to get access to the drug to test in the lab, and this was, whilst Josie was on the other combinations, and they sent me the drug and we started to study it. And to be honest, it really didn't do much in the lab to the tumour cells that we were growing. We needed a lot of drug for it to stop these tumours from growing. And so we studied how and why each of these different tumours that we were growing in the lab responded to this drug. And for the tumours that didn't seem to respond to the drug at all, they upregulated the pathway that was mutated in Josie's tumour. And so the pathway that was targeted by the drug she was already on, GDC 0084. It was this serendipitous moment. I remember going into the lab, my postdoc Ryan showing me this result and just looking at it going, this is unbelievable. And so we kind of already had one of the pieces of the puzzle that Josie was already on. And so when she was doing poorly, we had a strategy. The only problem is that the company would give us the drug for research purposes, but they wouldn't give us compassionate access to use it for Josie.
So what did you do?
Crazily, months before that, a mother from a DIPG patient in Portugal, in Lisbon, had contacted me and said to me, "Hi Matt, I know your daughter's got DIPG. My son Pedro has DIPG too. He's 8. And I've just found a way to buy this drug, ONC201, from a German urologist in Frankfurt." And and I don't know what's in the capsule. I've paid €500 for this capsule, and I'd love it if you would study it to make sure that what I'm about to give Pedro is real. And so we organised a FedEx courier, picked it up from her house, shipped it to Australia, did all of the kind of cancer research techniques and technologies that we do to study whether it would work. And we showed that the drug was almost identical to the drug that was on clinical trials that we were studying already, and that the dosing was the same and the capsules were similar. And so it was somewhat real. It was a real therapy. And so when the company wouldn't give us compassionate access to combine it with GDC 884, Phoebe and I rang this German neurologist as we were walking back to our accommodation in Byron Bay, and he answered the call and said, yes, I'll see you on Monday week in Frankfurt, and you need to bring your MRIs to prove that Josie has DIPG, and it'll cost $30,000 for 6 months' supply.
Is this just a guy acting alone? This just sounds sort of like out of a spy film almost, Matt, this moment. I mean, was it red flags for you at all, or this is just the way sometimes medication works?
No, this is completely outside the box. It's in some ways there's a lot of criticism about this in the field, and fair enough. But he's a genuine oncologist. He has a pharmacy that makes drugs, and we had tested it to show that it was real. The path to getting it is unusual, but in Germany there's unique laws. The law is called the Healing Act, and it states in the legislature that if there's a therapy that a clinician can prescribe, independent of IP protection and licensing, if the clinician can get access to it, they're allowed to prescribe it. And so he was using that loophole to make the therapy himself and then to prescribe it to families. And we were, I don't know, maybe the 20th family that had purchased it from him, and we were in contact with all of those families around the world. And some of the kids were doing really well on it. Of course, we informed Christina and Pedro that the drug was okay, and we were the first Australian family to get access to it.
And you got yourself to Germany by Monday, as you'd said?
Yeah, so I flew out of Mascot. I basically just packed the car up with a backpack and got to Sydney Airport, checked onto my flight on Sunday afternoon, landed at 7:40 in Frankfurt, got a taxi down the Autobahn at 100 and whatever we were going, was sitting outside the clinic waiting for him to arrive by 9, had a meeting with him. He wanted to talk science mostly. I wanted to get my prescription. He wrote the prescription, then I caught another taxi to the pharmacy, and then I was on a flight back to Sydney by 2 p.m. that day. I basically had gone for 24 hours.
Was there any part of you, I don't know, that was questioning how much longer you would pursue treatment? Like, was there a part of your voice that's thinking, we're coming to the end of this yet? Or were you still on that line of, we're going to just keep trying to buy time as long as we can?
When the drugs had failed the second time, and Josie's tumour was growing really rapidly, it had doubled in size within a month, and then she started this new combination. It stabilised the growth of the tumour again. She got somewhat better, but it didn't completely stop the growth of the tumour. And so at that point, we were still working on Plan E in the lab, but it soon became apparent that was going to be beyond what we were able to do in the clinic. And so once I was told that, then my focus shifted to palliative care, really, just to being with her. She had lost the ability to speak and swallow and to really move, and was perched in a car seat on our couch in between, our walks and things like that, unable to really do anything. And we really had to develop our own communication system. It was formed around blinking and movement of her eyes.
How much could she communicate with that?
We would ask her questions, trying to sense what she would want to communicate, and looking up was yes, and looking down was no. So we communicated with her like that all the way to the end.
Mm. Tell me about the last time that you actually heard her voice, Matt.
I suppose this is one of those moments where, you feel really guilty. So I had been doing a lot of running in the middle of the night, trying to raise awareness, and we'd started Run DIPG at that stage. And the first marathon that I tried to run was Sydney, and I got injured within 5Ks. It was an injury that I already had, and so I didn't finish that marathon. And then the Canberra Marathon came around in April, and Josie was in her third stage of progression where the tumour was growing, and a good friend of mine picked me up on Saturday afternoon. We drove to Canberra. I stayed with my mum, ran the marathon. So I finally completed the marathon, and I rang her and said, "Look, Dad's finished. Dad's coming home." And all she said to me was, in this sweet little voice, was, "Daddy, come home now." And by the time I got home, she never spoke again.
Tell me about the final brain scan that Josie had in November 2019.
I suppose that was something we've never really spoken about, and I've never looked at that scan. So I studied every scan, as you can imagine. I've studied every scan. I mapped them. I mapped the volume of the tumour, where it was growing, correlated it with the drugs. I had done a full science job on it, and we were in the inpatients of the John Hunter Hospital, and Josie no longer needed to have a GA for this scan because she couldn't move. And so that was fortunate in one way. And I remember standing by her bed in the day unit, surrounded by the amazing staff there at the John Hunter Children's Hospital. And Dr. Frank coming in, not even walking to the bed and looking at me. And I looked at him and I knew. And so we discussed it, and we stopped all treatments there and then. And it was about a week after that she left us.
What an extraordinarily loving family she had all the way through. How do you remember her as a family? How do you celebrate Josie now?
So I have got 3 little children. Henry, or Henri as I call him, turned up 6 months after she passed away. And so for a long time, he thought she lived on the moon. And so, her favourite song was Moon Shadow by Cat Stevens. And every time we see the moon, the kids yell out, "Hey, there's Josie." And she's buried about 2 kilometres from our house in a beautiful garden cemetery in Whitebridge. And, being OCD, her lawn is perfect.
Are you in charge of that, Matt?
Certainly. My father-in-law helps sometimes too, which is nice. And another DIPG dad comes and mows as well with another little girl who was diagnosed 12 months after Josie, buried 2 down from her, beautiful Tory. And so we celebrate all of our life's moments there. So we have birthdays. We have Christmas Eve there, where Josie gives all the kids a Christmas present. The kids always give her a cupcake and whatever it is that we're celebrating. And my extended family, my brother and his family, and my sisters-in-law and their families, and everybody come to the cemetery that live locally, and we celebrate moments together there with her.
Are you continuing to work on that research that, you were supercharged with when Josie was ill? Is that still a focus?
Absolutely, 1,000%. My whole life is consumed by DIPG research, DIPG advocacy, DIPG fundraising. I ran a marathon 2 days ago on the Gold Coast with Run DIPG, and all of the beautiful families up there who have lost their beautiful little treasures, who now advocate and fight for other kids. Our life is consumed by DIPG.
And are you confident that outcomes will continue to improve, that the therapies that are being developed will continue to help kids?
Absolutely. I think we can beat this cancer. I know we can extend survival, and my absolute ambition is to change Run DIPG from supporting research to supporting families of survivors. Survivorship charity is my goal, to support the families of kids that are diagnosed and then receive effective treatments. There's always going to be some collateral damage when you have the most aggressive tumour alive growing in the brainstem of a beautiful little one. And so our job one day, I hope, is to support the families to rehabilitate and to support them to get through their treatments.
Matt, I so appreciate you sharing your story and Josie's story with us on Conversations, and all the best for that incredible work that you're doing. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Sarah.
Professor Matt Dunn was my guest on Conversations today, and the charity that Matt founded with his wife Phoebe is called Run DIPG, and we'll link to that at the Conversations website too. This story was produced by Jen Leake and recorded on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. Our executive producer is Nicola Harrison. I'm Sarah Kanoski. Thanks for listening.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.